Top tip number 7, be aware of high contrast. There are two main lighting conditions, high contrast and low contrast. In the next video we'll talk more about low contrast, but this video is about being aware of high contrasting lighting conditions. They can be very difficult to get a correct exposure, and there's lots more choices to be made when you're working in strong light. You may ask, what is high contrast light and how are these conditions created? High contrast light is a strong light that creates dark shadows, and it's from an apparently small light source. I say apparently small because the sun creates high contrasting lighting conditions. It's small because it's so far away, but the light is very strong and the shadows will be very dark on a sunny day. Your camera's flash can also give a similar hard lighting unless it's adapted or reflected in some way. In high contrast light conditions, we need to remember that our eyes will see detail in the bright areas and the shadow areas, but our camera will often struggle to record in both the bright and the dark, so we need to be very careful how we set our exposure. Using our light meters well and choosing carefully where we take a reading from will allow us to make well exposed images, but there are choices to be made because oftentimes we will not be able to record the entire tonal range in a single image when the light is very strong and contrasting. When you're shooting in high contrast light conditions and choose to take an exposure reading over the entire frame with your matrix or evaluative setting, your camera will read the light from the bright areas and the dark areas and in the middle and give you an averaged reading. This may mean that you have lost some detail in the bright areas and the dark areas, but the middle tones will be there. If there is not much middle tone in the image, you may be disappointed in the result. If you set your exposure meter to take a spot reading from the brightest area of a frame, you will see detail in that area, but not necessarily see much detail in the dark areas of the image. This can create some very dramatic photographs. Alternatively, if you take a spot meter reading from the dark part of the frame and set your camera to expose well in that area, this is where you will see detail, but you will not see any detail or much detail in the bright parts of the image. So you can see, working in strong, hard lighting conditions, you must make a choice where to set your camera, and you can see some very interesting results and very different results depending on where you take your exposure meter reading from and how you set your camera. As you begin to understand more of how your exposure meter reads light in high contrast situations and learn to set your camera accordingly and make those choices, you will be more creative with your camera.